All right, so good afternoon, everybody. I think we're still in track sa syllabus natin that I've given you. So by this week, today is week 5. Yeah, week 5. So we should be discussing Renaissance architecture and we're still on track. So before we start, I'd like to ask everyone kung kumusta kayo. How is everyone? Okay naman? Ayaw niyo mag-share? Okay naman, wala namang may problem. Wala namang may comment sa first assessment natin, wala naman. So, okay. I think this is the class where I've given you already your scores. Yeah. So, before we start our lecture for today, I want us to do a review of our last week's discussion. So, first question is, what is Gothic architecture? What are the main contributions of Gothic architecture? What is its importance and impact to the general practice or the overall practice of the architecture profession? Yeah, profession. Can anyone tell me? Can anyone answer number one? Number one, just define in your own words, simplest word, what is Gothic architecture? So we have a recall from last week's discussion. Sige. Pag walang nag-raise ng hand, we will randomly call people. Like, let's try. Hi, Mariel. Mariel Kalanganan. Good afternoon, Mariel.
Afternoon po.
Can you answer number one for the class?
Gothic architecture po. Dito po yung may flying buttress po and piers.
And?
Yung flying buttress po, inalaw po niya yung Gothic architecture para magkaroon po ng more lightning na papasok po sa Di ba?
Uy, anong lightning?
Mas maliwanag po kasi mas maraming space for windows. Tapos, kasi po yung team nila is mas maliwanag, just mas mataas na maaabot yung langit in English, pero yun po yun. Kaya meron po silang spires, ano na nga yung word?
Mariel, I know what you're trying to say. I hope the class understands it, but I would like to correct that. Hindi siya lightning, ha? Hindi siya kidlat, ha? Hindi kidlat ang pinapapasok natin. We're not inviting lightning inside the building, okay? Yes. So I think to make it easier for you guys to remember, Gothic architecture is whenever you see the words height and light, the word pertaining to Gothic architecture. It's the progressive heightening and lightening of our buildings, especially cathedrals, which were yung primary or yung principal building type during this era. Yes? Sige, Mariel, can you call on your favorite classmate to answer number 2 next?
Si Shahana po.
Shahana, class president, good afternoon. Are you with us? Shahana, wait, let me just... Yes, good afternoon. Shahana, question number 2. What are the main contributions of Gothic architecture?
Ma'am, yung flying buttress po, yung piers po, tapos, yung pong may mga pointed arches. Ano ba yung rib arches? Po ba yung tawag? The rib vault?
Lapit na midterms nyo. Sige.
Yung mga rib vault.
Yes? Sige. Thank you, Shahana. Shahana, point of correction lang din. I think Mariel has also said it. But the buttress piers, these were not from your Gothic architecture, guys. Remember, this is from your Romanesque era architecture. Your buttress piers are actually the ones that made your Romanesque building more massive. These are the ones na nakarest sa wall nyo, which is why we could not have big windows in our Romanesque architecture. Whereas when we went to our Gothic architecture, this is one of the longest, ha? This is, I think, probably longer than your Renaissance period. Let me check, but I think this is one or almost 1 century longer than the Renaissance period. So, si Gothic naman, we wanted the building to get more light. We wanted it not lightning, but we wanted it to get more lighting, and we wanted it to be higher. So these are the innovations that they gave us. Remember your flying buttresses. That's only present in your Gothic architecture. Your pointed arches, your spires, your pinnacles, your finials, your gargoyles. Remember that. I think that's one of the unique features of Gothic architecture. Doon tayo nagsimulang mag-incorporate ng humanoids or human or animal figures in the structure. Aside from, of course, yung mga human figures natin in our HOA1, classical Greek and Roman, yung may mga caryatids tayo and Athens. Yeah, yung meron tayong mga people na as columns. Do you still remember that? Yes or no? Yes po. It's good that you actually remember that kasi we can see the connection from your HOA 1 to your HOA 2, and you have to mind this, you have to keep this in mind na these progress or these events, they were not happening at the same place, but they were happening almost at the same time, or hindi man at the same time pero may overlap. Pero these people were not talking. So these developments, these buildings, they were out of yung human nature na talaga ng tao. Okay? So, Shahana, can you call on your favorite classmate to answer our number 3 question?
Jessica po.
Sino? Sino?
Si Jessica
Si Jessica. Jessica who?
Andrada po.
Jessica Andrada. Jessica, good afternoon. Hello, Jessica. Parang wala si Jessica, Shahana. Just Jessica. Ay, she's here. Jessica. Yan. Jessica, can you... Wait. Parang wala si Jessica talaga. Yan. Kaya ko kayo pinag-on cam para alam ko kung andyan kayo. Sige. Shahana, wala si Jessica. Second favorite classmate.
Si Ann po.
Si Ann. Si May Ann?
Opo.
Si May Ann. Sige, May Ann. May Ann for number 3.
Ma'am, naririnig po.
Ako naririnig kita. Ewan ko sila.
Ma'am, isa sa mga bale marami din na pong mga practice na na-adapt na po natin ngayon. Katulad po nung binigay niyo po noon sa amin sa Puerto Princesa International Airport po. Yung paggamit po ng fan vaulted ceiling po. Yun po yung isa sa mga tumatak sa akin na parang curious din po ako if paano nila nagawa yon noon and paano na-adapt ngayon ng dito, lalo na locally dito sa Puerto Princesa, yung mga ganong types ng ceiling. And also po yung paggamit nila ng flying buttresses kasi hindi na parang dati po kasi 'di ba maliliit lang yung mga windows, hindi pumapasok yung light and hindi masyadong nabibigyan ng importance yung mga stained glass natin. So ngayon parang dahil po sa flying buttresses na ginawa ng mga during this era ay nakatulong po siya para mas mapaganda yung interiors ng isang church po.
Uy, that's very nice. That's a very nice connection that you gave. Kasi actually, yung fan vaults natin during the Gothic era, nung late Gothic na, ano siya hindi structural siya, pero in PPS, in Puerto Princesa, it was a decorative one. So, one good connection that you made is, dahil ginawa nila na higher na, ginawa nila na meron tayong mas malaking window space in the wall, we can actually provide more light and we could actually give more importance sa interiors natin. Kasi basically, kay Gothic era, nagsimula yung pagdi-detail natin sa interior. na we will slowly come into perfection during the Renaissance time. So are you guys ready for your Renaissance period? Where is my group 1? Sino yung group 1 ko?
Ma'am, kami po.
Kayo, are you ready guys? Are you ready? Yes? Okay, bago kayo, ako muna. So I'll give you the other half of the class, maybe. So today, I'll just give you a quick introduction. These are our discussion points. Introduction to Renaissance architecture, the phases of Renaissance era, early, high, and late. Again, katulad lang ni Gothic, this is a very long time in our history. This is a very long period in our history. I think 5 centuries. Let me just check if I'm correct. Later on, we will know pala. This is 14 something or 15th century. So, siya yung pumalit kay Gothic era. So, we will talk about the architectural character, the important buildings, some, not all. I leave you to read some others, given my reading materials. I'll give you more reading materials this week. Its innovations and inventions, and the prominent architects during this era. Take note, this is the first time that I'm including in my discussion the prominent architects during one era. We'll find out why. Probably because walang architect ng mga naunang period. And dito in this era, we actually formalized architecture as a profession. Not really formalized na, hey, archi tawag sa kanila. No, but more of nagkakaroon na tayo ng architectural theories ng discipline. Later, we will know about the books that they wrote, De Re Edificatoria, the 4 books on architecture. We will know that later. So here are our guide questions. These are the questions that we should be able to answer later. So what is meant by the word Renaissance? Why did we have a transition period in history called Renaissance, and what brought it about? What is the main contribution of this era to the practice of architecture? Okay. So Renaissance architecture, it started in Italy. Do you remember your Piazza del Miracoli? When did we talk about Piazza del Miracoli? Yes, anyone? Do you still remember your piazza or plaza or Piazza de Miracoli, or the square or plaza of miracles? Do you still remember where?
Sa ano po?
Yes, sir. Saan?
Sa Romanesque po.
Sa Romanesque. Sino yung sumagot sa akin? Si Lian Nicole? Di ba si John Red yan? John Red, di
mali
ba
po
ikaw
yung
yan?
pangalan mo. Ginamit
Kaya
po pala
nga.
ni ate.
Di ba? John Red. Diba? Anyway, wait lang ha. So, did we discuss that in our? Saan? Saan, John
Ayan,
Red?
ma'am, okay na.
Yan, saan? Sorry, what was your answer? John Red, what was your answer?
Sa ano po? Sa Romanesque po.
Sa Romanesque, correct naman. Sa Romanesque, it also happened in, part of it also started in Italy. So again, Italian yan, di ba? Si Piazza del Miracoli, Leaning Tower of Pisa. So that's in Italy. Now, your Renaissance architecture will also start in Italy. Will branch to Spain, England, whatever parts of the medieval Europe. Pero it started in Italy. Okay. So, the word Renaissance, part of your guide question, it came from the Latin word renascita. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct, but more or less I am. So it happened between 1420 and 1550. It means rebirth, rediscovery, and oftentimes or sometimes it was branded as the Dark Ages. So, yan. Rebirth, what do we mean by rebirth? It was a period of artistic, cultural, economical, and political rebirth. Bakit? In the architectural sense, they were coming to terms na binabalik natin yung classic Greek and Roman order. Ito yung time na yon. So if nakinig kayo sa classical architecture nyo in HOA1, this is very easy. This part is very easy kasi revival lang siya ng classic Greek and Roman natin. In the simplest sense, ganun siya. So rediscovery, this is a period of rediscovery in philosophy, literature, and art. Architecture is no less different than that. So at this time, nagkakaroon tayo ng, well, we're returning to what we had before. So, easiest sense nga to answer it is nagkakaroon tayo ng rebirth of our, wait lang, someone, guys, pag nagjo-join kayo ng meeting, nadidistract pala ako. Kasi I have to admit you again. Anyway, another is, it was branded as the time of war. So this happened, your Renaissance or your Age of Enlightenment, it happened during the Dark Ages. So paano ka nga naman magkakaroon ng enlightenment kung maliwanag? So yun nga, it happened during the Dark Ages. It was a time of war, ignorance, famine, and some pandemic. Some pandemic like the bubonic plague. Anyway, this time, people were really confident of what they know. They were satisfied with what they know. Dito tayo nagkaroon ng mga bagong philosophers who anchored their philosophies into the previous or yung mga nauna sa kanilang philosophers. Tapos marami ring calamities, maraming crisis sa food, etc., etc. So it was a time of famine then. So, moving on, during your Renaissance period, sabi ko nga, this is the first time that we discussed, that we included in the discussion, the prominent architects. So, during this time, yung personality daw ng mga architect or ng mga designers increased in importance. So, mas nare-relate na siya dun sa buildings. So, mas kita mo na siya. Parang when I say, gawa ito ni Alberti, ito gawa ni Andrea Palladio, ito gawa ni Michelangelo, ito gawa ni Raphael or ni Donato Bramante. You will know just by saying the architect's name, malalaman mo dapat in your mind ano yung klase ng structure na kilala siya for, ano yung style niya. Basically, parang sinabi ko na ganito mag-design si national artist Leandro Locsin. Massive, heavy, CCP, di ba? Ganito naman mag-design si Manyosa. Coconut Palace, yung resorts, medyo tropical, medyo Filipino. So, meron silang sari-sariling ego or alter ego na they put into the structure. Merong signature nila. Meron na you would know na ito ay gawa ni ganitong tao. Because during this phase, they incorporated themselves into their designs and their buildings. Next is the use of classical orders, round arches, and symmetrical proportions. Later on, we'll find out what we mean by, oh my God, binalik natin yung mga classical orders before, the Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, the Tuscan, and the composite orders. You will still see these 5 orders again in your Renaissance architecture. Round arches, of course, we have been seeing that. We're familiar with that. Desire for symmetry, proportion, and harmony. This is probably one of the characteristics na makikita natin later on pag tinignan na natin yung mga structure na very evident kasi this is a time that they wanted things na hindi na sila masyadong mag-iisip. I mean, when you see a building, you know it's a building, you know what it's for. Hindi na yung ang dami nating ornaments na hindi naman natin talaga technically kailangan, or we're doing the ornaments just for the sake na we have this certain character in this era, remember? So, silhouettes are clean and simple with flat roofs. Most of the time, flat roofs, yes, pero may mga parapet walls yan. Walls made up of dressed masonry blocks gave buildings their sense of dignity. So, ano siya, hindi siya plain na semento na wall, na masonry work lang. Pero it was more of, meron na silang finishes Maybe painting, yes. Maybe stones, yes. Maybe cut stones, yes. Depends on the taste and the style of the architect. And horizontality was evident. The buildings were much more massive in the horizontal scale than vertically. When we talk about Gothic architecture, just to give you a comparison, we wanted it to be higher. Now this one, hindi naman sa we wanted it to be lower, pero we want it to look massive, not really massive, but horizontal, balanced, secured. You know, the things that come up to your mind pag nakita mo na yung building. So let's move on. Ornaments were based on mythological subjects, and one technique that emerged during the Renaissance time was the graffito. It's a scratch or yung plaster, ini-scratch natin yung top to reveal the colors below. So that's one of the techniques that was prominent during the Renaissance era. Characteristics of your Renaissance architecture, again, as I've said, your buildings are clear, easily comprehended, easily understood. Walang extra ornaments that would account for mag-iisip pa yung tao. Symmetry, geometry, proportion. During this time, they wanted it to be regular, like this one nga, regularity of parts. Yung hindi na masyadong madami yung or irregularities niya. Let's say, paano ba? Mas balanced siya, mas dependent siya sa mathematical ratios, mas dependent siya into symmetry. What you see in the left side, you will also see on the right side. At yung symmetry niya is always along the y-axis. So hindi siya symmetrically horizontally, it's always symmetrically vertically. Kaya sabi ko, what's on the left is also what's on the right. So classical orders were reused. We know that already. The 5 orders were reused. Your Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, Tuscan, and your composite columns. Mathematically precise ratio of width and height, or height and width. This has something to do with the character of Renaissance, which is the horizontality that we're talking about. Another is the flat or coffered ceiling. During your Gothic time, sometimes the ceiling was left untouched. Wala siya masyadong decor or walang masyadong detail. And now, instead of leaving it blank, aside from flat nga, may flat ceilings pa rin kasi, they have now what you call the coffered ceiling. So, doors usually have lintels, arches, or pediments. Windows have transom decoration. To what's a transom? The one above your window. Buildings were designed with architectural theories in mind. As I've mentioned, we have 2 weeks for this discussion kasi this is a lot to take in. This is a lot to take in. So this is just your introduction because your Renaissance period is the one na sobrang packed. So this is just your introduction. If you have any questions so far, you let me know. You raise your hand and you wait for you to be acknowledged. So Renaissance architecture has 3 phases, as I've told you. First one is your early Renaissance. This one occurred in Italy. Adaptation of classical detail and ornamentation. Let me get my notebook first. Okay. Yeah. One example of your early Renaissance was this one. If you will Google this one now, this is Santa Maria del Fiore, or Saint Mary of the Flowers in Italy. So this is Florence Cathedral. If titignan nyo siya in Google now, you'll see this as a Gothic architecture. Kasi what it was partly, but the addition of the dome by one of the architects that we will be discussing for this era, Filippo Brunelleschi or Brunelleschi something, Brunelleschi. Siya yung gumawa ng dome. So for a time during the construction of this church or this cathedral, yung construction niya ay somehow nahinto because they don't know how nila ito terminate or igagawin yung dome na ginagawa nila or yung gusto nila. Hindi nila kaya until the time that they asked Brunelleschi to design it for them. So Brunelleschi was successful in doing so. He made the dome of the Florence Cathedral with two types or two concentric domes. One is your inner dome and the other is your outer dome. Your inner dome is a self-supporting dome. Paano niya ginawa na self-supporting? Meron siyang concentric circles inside. Concentric circles made of masonry inside. Yung brick pattern niya was herringbone pattern, and they have embedded chain supports as structural element of the dome. So dito sa dome ng Florence Cathedral, successful na si Brunelleschi to incorporate the classical order, the mathematical computations, the mathematical ratios, which is why he was successful in making the dome. This is one of his most known or most important, most prominent structures that he built. So he also formulated the linear perspective. So kung meron kayong hinanakit sa mga ginagawa niyong 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective, sisi niyo siya partly kay Brunelleschi kasi siya nakaisip na gawin niyo yan. Yes, questions, comments, suggestions, violent reactions? None? We proceed. Florence Cathedral. So this is the floor plan of your Florence Cathedral. I'd just like you to take note. This is a plan for a cathedral, but this is a plan for a Gothic cathedral. Later on, actually in your Renaissance era, we will see more circular plans. But I'd like to remind you that your Florence Cathedral is partly Gothic, partly Renaissance. So it still follows the cross plan. Yan. Another structure by Brunelleschi and his apprentice. Hindi kasi nakikredit. Most sources would tell you that Riccardi Palace was designed by Brunelleschi. They forget Michelozzo, which is his apprentice. So Riccardi Palace was named after, what's his name? Medici Riccardi. This is the family. The family that owns this place. So this is an example of your early Renaissance structure. What elements of classical architecture do you see? Anyone? What elements of classical architecture do you see? Okay, let's try calling someone. Sige, let's try calling the first person that comes up. Raniel Dailin Puno. Hi, Raniel.
Hi, hello po, ma'am.
Hello, how are you? I hope you're fine. Raniel, can you help me out? Can you tell me what elements of your classical architecture is present here?
Balance po, ma'am.
That's one. Balance, proportion. More than that, you see the pediments above the windows. So dito nila ini-incorporate to. Pediments, and of course, your arches. Ini-incorporate na nila. You also have your, what do you call this one? Anong tawag nyo dito? I told you this one. I told you this one. Anong tawag dito sa nakasupport na to?
Buttresses, ma'am.
Uy, hindi Hindi yan buttress
Corbel arches.
Corbel. Hindi siya corbelled arch. Hindi siya arch. Remember I showed you the corbel before as yung support, horizontal support to something. Yan. So there's that. There's that. So it's a revival of the things that we already know. So this is why I said na this is just a review for you. You see your classical orders here, your column, your colonnades, and your arches. This is also part of your classical Greek and Roman architecture, your Greco-Roman architecture. So let's move on. This is the plan of the Riccardi Palace. You see this one, the open court. This is here. Now, ito yung mga window types natin. The arcaded window, The architrave, don't forget this, this one will surface more or less most of the time than the arcade. Your architrave, it's supported by corbels with anong tawag dito? This, you have a seal, you have your window, and you have your mini pediment. Sometimes you can have the arch, sometimes without the arch. Pwede rin siyang wala. Your arcade windows, tuloy-tuloy siya. Window with semicircular termination. And your order, meaning you have your poste, you have your beam or lintel, and you have your pediment. Remember I told you kanina the doors will now have lintel, arches, and pediments. This is what we mean by that. Doors and windows for that matter. So questions, comments so far before we move on to another structure? None? Just remember, for you to easily differentiate the different eras or the different periods, meron yan at meron lagi na defining characteristic. You will have a defining characteristic of your early Christian period, your Byzantine period, your Romanesque period, your Gothic period, and your Renaissance period is no different. You will always have a defining characteristic. So moving on, another prominent architect in this era is Leon Battista Alberti. This is the Santa Maria Novella. So he helped this guy, your guy Batista, he helped promote architecture from an artisan's trade to a profession. Isa siya sa mga responsable bakit may mga arkitekto now. So remember during those time, hindi naman talaga sila technically architects eh. Pero he was one of those who pushed that it be a profession. Remember the books that I told you or the architectural theories that are now surfacing during the Renaissance period? Battista Alberti or Leon Battista Alberti also wrote the Dere Edificatoria, or it's a book about, it's a manuscript about the edifice of the building. You can read on this, maybe I'll give you a soft copy, pero so far, dito yung maraming books eh. Dito yung maraming books about architecture. You will have your 4 books, you will have your 10 books. You'll have a lot of those, from Vitruvius to the last person who wrote any book about this. So back to the structure, Santa Maria Novella is one of the first churches where consoles were placed in the facade over the side aisles to connect them with the nave. Ito siya. Ito siya. Okay? So anything different about the structure that you're noticing? Hindi natin nakita yung gantong design ever. Hindi natin nakita yung gantong design ever sa mga churches natin before. Did we see the pediment before? Any church at all, did we see a pediment? No. This is the first time we're seeing this one, di ba? Or first time since we started HOA2, but definitely you have seen this in your classical Greek and Roman. So your Greco-Roman, you've seen this one. So bumabalik na tayo sa ganon. You'll see more of the Greek and Roman elements now that were in the Renaissance. So a good review of your HOA1 will help you. Next is, this is the interior of Santa Maria de Novella. The plan. Notice na hindi na siya cross plan. Hindi din siya hindi siya circular technically, pero it doesn't follow the cross plan anymore. Majority of our buildings now, our cathedrals or churches, will now follow a different plan. Si St. Peter is a different one kasi nag-start siya ng medyo cross na maliit na cross. But then ang daming additions. I hope May Ann is ready na himay-himayin sa atin tonight yung mga additions sa plano. So, another structure by your guy, Batista, he also designed San Andrea, in Mantua. It's a modern Renaissance church that consists of a single nave with transepts, with the interior ornamented with a single order on pedestal supporting a barrel vault. I couldn't find a decent picture of the interior na mag-show nito, but I'll make sure before I send you the PDF that I'll include that one. So there, this is one more structure by Batista. Again, did you see pediments in our churches before? Did you see these big arches before, or the Roman? I think the order of the columns now. Did you see this in the churches that we discussed before? We had columns, but we did not have these kinds of classical order, 'di ba? In our columns before.
Yes.
We did not have this one. Your fluted columns were not present during your Byzantine, Gothic, and Renaissance, Romanesque era. So they're making a comeback now. The first time that you saw this was when you were studying History 1, your Greek and your Roman architecture, your fluted columns, the number of flutes. We have the number of flutes for a Doric column, an Ionic column, 'di ba? So, any questions so far? Questions, comments, suggestions. If your question is answerable by the next week's or by next week's discussion, I will let you know. And that will be a homework for you. So this is Santa Andrea in Mantua. Ayan, meron pala akong interior na nakuha. So it's a single barrel vault. It's a single nave with a transept. Yan, this is your plan. Single vault with a transept. Okay. High Renaissance. This is actually parang 30 years lang nangyari or less than 30 years. Hinati siya kasi this is important in terms of your arts, literature, syempre architecture din. But here, in your High Renaissance, I only have one structure by Donato Bramante, which is the Tempieto di San Pietro, or the temple, the small temple of Saint Peter. This is a symbol or a shrine for Saint Peter's martyrdom, considered as one of the first high Renaissance building in Rome. High Renaissance, why? The plan is circular. I'll show you the plan. The plan is circular. Why circular? Bramante, when he was designing this one, he wanted to perfect it. And he wanted to use the circular plan because he believes that the circular plan represents divine perfection. So pag sinabi natin na circle, this is the shape of the perfection of God. This is the shape of your Renaissance era. So mostly circle or anything along those lines. So this is somehow your first building that achieved the best example na nagkaroon na ng harmony yung proportions natin. Not too high, not too low, not too big, the spaces were not too tight or not too loose. You have your columns, your Doric columns, your Doric order. You have them in a circular colonnade. You have your dome. You have your what do you call this one? Yan, assignment nating lahat to identify this one. Sige. I think when you go back to your Greek and Roman, you will find out, or you will see just a review. We should all do that later. As a review, you'll see the parts that were present there are now being incorporated into buildings of lesser scale, like this one. This is a small building, ha, but they managed to put your Greco-Roman elements in it. 'Di ba? Going back to your Greek architecture and your Roman architecture, they wanted their buildings to be grand. 'Di ba? Ang lalaki ng columns natin, ang lalaki ng buildings natin. Remember the Parthenon? It's not this small. And even if hindi ganun kalaki yung mga structures during the Renaissance era, it was able to deploy yung mga classical elements without a problem. Kasi they wanted to make sure na yung proportion niya ay tama. They could not make it bigger than it should be or than what's preferable. Remember I told you about the symmetry. vertical symmetry siya lagi, always in the y-axis. Pag itong building na to, hinati ko siya sa gitna. This one. Do you see my pointer, guys? O naglalag yung pointer ko sa inyo?
Visible po, ma'am.
Visible. So, pag hinati ko tong building na to, in the center, what you see on this side?
Akin lang.
Sorry, Mariel. Sorry, Mariel. Sana mapatawad mo ako, Mariel.
Ay, naka-on na.
Sorry, Mariel, kung sa'yo naglalag. Akala ko gusto mo siyang i-announce sa class.
Sorry po, ma'am.
Anyway, bago tayo inistorbo ni Mariel at naglalag daw sa akin. Sorry, Mariel. bago tayo inistorbo ni Mariel, dito tayo, hinahati natin yung building. Imagine na hinahati natin siya. What you see on this side will also be what you will see on this side. So that's what we meant by gusto nila ng symmetry, gusto nila ng regularity. They wanted their proportions to be accurate mathematically para visually pleasing yung buildings nila. Okay? Naintindihan natin so far, given the examples that we have? Yes, John Red. Question, comment, suggestions, violent
Ma'am,
reaction.
gusto lang po mag-share dun po sa may
Sige, ano siya share mo?
Yung tinatanong niyo po yung sa may taas po ng bawat columns. Yung parang,
nalaman mo na yung tawag. Nakalimutan ko.
ma'am, natatandaan ko po.
Ang taray. Running
yung
for honors.
Ma'am, paborito ko po kasi yung sa may sa may classical po.
Sige, ang tawag.
Po, yung freeze. Tapos po yung parts po niya. Parts
I
po niya
remember
is,
now.
yung nasa
Yung
gitna po
freeze.
is, yung meron po mga ornaments is the metopy. And
The
yung
metopy.
yung tatlong lines po is the triglyph. Kaya po siya tinawag na
Triglyph. Ano yung itlog?
Yung itlog
Hoy,
po.
meron dyan Meron dyan itlog Is it the metopy?
Yung metopy po, yung parang may pictures po siya iba't iba. May
Iba't iba.
decorations. Apo. Depende po sa
So you have your triglyph here. Uy, thank you, John Red. Kasi I forgot my notebook. I forgot my notebook at home. Usually when I conduct my lectures with you, I have my big notebook wherein everything's written there. So I forgot it at home and I couldn't remember what it's called. Thank you for sharing. This is the triglyph and this is your metopy. The entirety of this one is called your frieze. Thank you, John Red, na running for honors. Anyway, you can see naman from what you've discussed in your HOA1, it's just coming back now. So ano lang siya, the return of the comeback. Anyway, so much for our high Renaissance. We now go to our late Renaissance. This is the pinnacle of classical simplicity and the harmony. Andrea Palladio. Andrea Palladio was one of those. Actually, si Andrea Palladio, Palladio is similar to Palladian architecture. Palladian architecture started from him kasi he had he had his own style of building. This building, Villa Rotonda, this is a house. He wanted it to transform into a temple-ish. Tapos, what he did was, all of the four facades, they look alike. So anywhere you look, you will see the same facade as the one that's depicted on our slide. Andrea Palladio also wrote the 4 books on architecture. Next week, I think by next week, we will discuss the reactions or the movements against or for your Renaissance architecture, si Mannerism, si Baroque, and si Rococo. So, Villa Rotonda, this one, if you can see it from here, this is very, very, very overly classical. You also have your statues, your pediments, your frieze, your columns, your order. It's visually visible for us to say na, "Uy, this is classical architecture." Pero we would be wrong to say na it's classical kasi it happened or it was built during the Renaissance. So what I'm saying kanina, itong facade na to is the same. Look, naka-extend to yung staircase niya. Look at this one. This is the same. This is the same here. Naka-forward tong portion na to. In this side, you'll see naka-forward din siya. So, let's see the plan. See? Whatever it is that is in one side is also the same sa 3 other sides. That's Andrea Palladio's Villa Rotonda for you. Another prominent personality in the Renaissance era is Giacomo Barozzi de Vignola. This is the Jesuit church. Does the church look familiar to you? It should. It should look familiar to you kasi kakapakita ko lang sa inyo ng Santa Maria del Novella by your Guy Batista. So, medyo in this time, it's a little more refined. You still have your consoles here. You have your classical orders here, your pediment here, your arc window. You have your big pediment here. You have your column orders here. It's basically a revival of your classical orders. So, sabi ko kanina sa inyo, in this era, marami na tayong architectural theories. I'm pretty sure you will tackle this in your TOA. De Vignola also wrote the 5 Orders of Architecture. So, yung 4 books kay Palladio, yung De Re Edificatoria kay Batista, yung 5 orders naman ay kay Da Vignola. Forgive me kasi I forgot my notebook. I could have shared more. But if I get home now, kasi I discussed with you sa office If I get home now and I see my notebook, I'll make sure to share the other trivias and tidbits with you guys. Yan. So this is the Jesuit church, the interior of Jesuit church. You see now, the ceilings, the interiors are intricately painted compared to your Gothic era architecture. It was left blank. 'Di ba? The decorations that we have were the ribbing of your vaults, the decors that we have in the ceiling were the bosses, the fan vaults, 'di ba? Now, nagkakaroon na tayo ng mural paintings sa kisame. Ang tagal gawin yan. And I'd like you to appreciate na this is one of those na pinakamahirap gawin during their time kasi nakatingala ka pag ginagawa mo yan. Aside from that, yung proportions ng painting nila, they were able to do it on a large scale. So ito kasing Renaissance era is not just an age of enlightenment for architecture. It was also for arts in general, literature, 'di ba? Politically, yes, not just architecture. So there, your Jesuit church also has a dome at the back. Yeah. This is the plan of your Jesuit church. Another prominent figure of your Renaissance era is Michelangelo, your favorite Ninja Turtle. Kilala niyo yung 4 na Ninja Turtle?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Micaela. Micaela, what are their names?
Si Michelangelo,
Mhm.
si Raphael, si Donatello, tsaka si...
Sino?
Nakalimutan ako.
Hell, call a friend. Call a friend.
Si Shahana po yung mga kilala ko eh.
Shana. Sino yung 4 na Ninja Turtle? Yung pinaka-importante pang yung nakalimutan mo? Si Raphael, si Michelangelo,
Leonardo po.
si Leonardo, Shahana. Sorry, Joshua, nag-unmute si Shahana. So, yung 4 na yon are actually 4 Renaissance painters. Leonardo as in Leonardo da Vinci. Raphael as in, anong pangalan ni Raphael? Mahirap i-pronounce yung surname ni Raphael eh. Wait. Rafael Sancho de Urbino. And no, yeah, Raffaello Sancho. And then Michelangelo Buonarroti and then Donatello. So sila yung 4 na Ninja Turtle who are also painters and sculptors during the Renaissance period. Donato de Niccolo de Beto. Oh my God, it's so hard. Anyway, one of Michelangelo's buildings was this one, the Farnese Palace. So Michelangelo was a Florentine sculptor and the painter of the roof of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican. He finished the Farnese Palace and carried out the dome of Saint Peter. Michelangelo also worked on the Saint Peter. Tama ba ako, Mayan? Mayan.
Yes po, ma'am.
Mayan.
Pa.
Tama ako.
Yes po,
Sige.
ma'am.
Si Michelangelo also worked on the Saint Peter. And he was also the one who did the painting sa roof ng Sistine Chapel. Can you tell me what was that famous painting that I might or might not have said to you last week? I know I've said this last week eh. I gave you a hint. Anong painting yung pinaint ni Michelangelo sa Sistine Chapel?
The Last Judgment po.
Hindi. Sino yon? Sino yon?
Ay, hindi po ba?
The Last Judgment was painted by Michelangelo, of course. Pero where did he paint that? Where did he paint that? Ayan na. Si Mariel ba yon? Yung Last Judgment, I think it was in the wall.
Sa Sistine Chapel po, ma'am.
Yeah, it was in the Sistine Chapel. Pero I think that was not in the ceiling. I think that was the one in the wall.
Sa
Tama ba?
west wall po, ma'am.
Ha?
Sa west wall po.
Sa wall siya, di ba? The Last Judgment was painted on the wall. Now, meron pang isang pinintahan si Michelangelo. Sige na nga. Wala talaga kayong guess bago ko ipasa yung mic.
Creation of Adam po.
The Creation of Adam. It's a fresco painting done by Michelangelo Buonarroti in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Thank you, Shahana. Was it you? Okay. Let's take a look at Farnese Palace now. What classical elements do you see? Kakabigay ko lang sa inyo nung type ng window. So what classical orders do you see just by looking at the outside? Anyone?
Architrave po. Archive po.
Thank you, Leslie. That's your architrave. And you still have your arch hero. Your true arc. Di ba meron yan? Yung corbelled arch and your true arch. So this is a true arch. You also have your windows here. Your repetition. The element of repetition is very visible. Hello guys, repetition yan. Your symmetry is also visible. If we divide this into two, in the middle, down the middle, you see the same here and the same here. You can even count. You can even count. Tig-ilan sila, tig-anim na window sila on each side from here if we divide this one. Diba? Another is, this is what we tell na gusto nila ng harmony in their structure. Hindi tayo nag-aagawa ng ng itsura or nagagawa ng spotlight. And your wall, it's not bare, it's painted or it's finished with a stone. And then you can see now the building has what they call proportion. Yung horizontality ng building, it's seen here. Hindi siya nagmamataas na gusto niyang tumaas-taas talaga. Although mataas siya, 3 story siya na mataas ang ceiling height. And this is actually a play. This is the perfect play on geometry. Kasi sa late Renaissance na tayo. So any questions, comments, suggestions so far? Comments, questions, suggestions? None. This is the plan for the Farnese Palace. And I included St. Peter's in my slide, but I will give the floor to our reporters for this afternoon. So Mayan, I'll stop my screen sharing, Mayan, and you can share. So any
Okay po.
questions, comments, suggestions, violent reactions so far? I know it's a lot to take in kasi Renaissance is actually one of the fully loaded topics. So, yes, Mayan.
Ma'am, naka-disable po yung screen share.
Naka-disable yung screen share. Wait lang. Wait lang. Hindi. You can share. Who can share? All participants. Can you try again?
Okay na po, ma'am.
Okay na, sige. Before that, meron ba kayong questions, comments, suggestions, violent reaction? This is technically just your introduction to your Renaissance period, ha? You have to remember na it's a two-meeting. Yeah. Sige, I'll mute myself. I'm sorry, Mayan. I'm not taking your time. You can have your time now. All right?
Alam mo, wait lang, inaayos ko lang po.
Hindi, joke lang. Mag-mute na ako so you can take the floor now. And your friends, make sure to submit to me your slide and your names. And I will also give you your grade today for this one. Thank you, Mayan.
Okay po, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. We are the first group who will discuss the information and knowledge that we have gathered and research about the St. Peter's Basilica, one of the holiest temple of the Catholic Church and an important pilgrimage site. So our topic is divided, or our discussion is divided into two parts. First is the introduction and the history of St. Peter's Basilica, and the second is the 12 architects and their contribution to its completion. So, about St. Peter's Basilica, the St. Peter's Church, also called as the St. Peter's Basilica, is a late Renaissance church within Vatican City, Italy's largest, richest, and most stunning basilica. So, ang St. Peter's Basilica is outcome siya ng works ng iba't ibang architects under the direction of the Pope. It was consecrated in Rome in 1626 after 120 years of construction on top of a 4th century church. It was the second church to stand above the crypt or tomb, believed to hold the body of Saint Peter the first pope.
So kung babalikan po natin yung ancient Roman era, yung pinatatayuan po ng bagong St. Peter's Basilica at yung dati is yung dating Nero's Circus, a place where games were performed and a place where there was an ancient necropolis o libingan. And by tradition, noong 64 CE or Common Era, this is the place where St. Peter himself was crucified and buried. Next, 150 Common Era. The site of St. Peter's Tomb became a famous area visited by many pilgrims over the year. So para markahan yung Apostles' Tomb, naglagay sila ng prominent structure na tinatawag nilang Trophy of Gaius. Noong 326 to 333 AD, under the reign of Emperor Constantine, the old St. Peter's Basilica was built. Yung old St. Peter's Basilica, yung original Basilica ng St. Peter's in Rome, ito yung naka-basilica plan. Tapos, noong 1505 AD, like many medieval churches, it eventually fell into disrepair. Trinay siyang ayusin ng maraming popes. However, but all the attempts failed. Finally, Pope Julius II decided to demolish the structure and replace it with a new basilica. 1506, the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica began. Nagtagal siya ng 120 years, tas natapos siya noong 1626. So, ito po yung dating plan ng Old St. Peter's Basilica. nakabase po siya dun sa plan po ng Roman Basilica nun po. Donato Bramante.
Shahana, sorry. Balik mo dun sa slide na si Constantine na. Yan, okay na yan, okay na yan. Under the reign of Emperor Constantine, the
I'm
old
sorry.
St. Peter's Basilica was built. I just want to add a little bit of recall.
Apo.
Si Constantine was the first emperor na na-convert into Christianity, correct?
Apo.
He was also one of those na since na-convert na siya, he built the new Roman capital somewhere in Byzantium. He wanted to spread the belief or the practice of Christianity. This is one of the reasons why St. Peter's Basilica, or the old one, was built. Yun lang siya, Hana, para may important tidbit lang tayo. Thank you.
Thank you po. Donato Bramante, unang arkitekto na nag-ambag sa bagong St. Peter's Basilica. He introduced the high Renaissance style in architecture. Next po. Yung contribution niya, he created the initial plan for the new church. The area was cleared. In fact, the architect earned the unfortunate title Ruinante because he demolished many old buildings in the process of reshaping the Vatican. Instead of borrowing from ancient Roman basilica plan like how most churches had been built, Bramante's design was based on the mindset of high Renaissance, where there is an enormous interest in mathematics and in ideal perfect beauty and finding perfect proportions. Kaya ang ginawa po niya is yung gumawa siya ng centrally planned church in the shape of a Greek cross, or yung pantay po yung bawat arm, enclosed within a square with an enormous dome over the center and smaller domes and half domes radiating out. Next po.
Good afternoon po, ma'am. I'm Adeline Tan. I'll be presenting the second architect that worked on the St. Peter's Basilica after the death of Donato Bramante. First, I'll be sharing a brief background about Giuliano de Sangallo or Sangalo. Many architects vied for the privilege of working on such prestigious project and put forward plans for a new basilica. At ang napili nga po plan ay kay architect Donato Bramante. When he died in 1514, pinagpatuloy po ito ni architect Giuliano de Sangallo, was a military engineer, artist, and architect. Isa po sa mga project niya yung Santa Maria Carceri in year 1485 to 1491. It was a church where the Greek cross layout was much influenced by Filippo Brunelleschi or Brunelleschi. In addition po, he was successful military engineer in 1478. And for his contribution naman po on the St. Peter Basilica, he realized the value of coffering. When we say coffer naman po in architecture, ito po yung mga square or polygonal ornamental sunken panel used in a series po para sa decoration po ng ceiling or vault na nag-lead kay Gilano para sa at patibayan and i-extend yung peristyle ni Bramante into a series of arch structures surrounded by projecting foundation. Out ambulatory was built in his time. Marami bakit po on following the death of Julius II. The info na rin po
Ma'am, parang nag-lag po ata na si Edra. So, para po sa...
70 years
Sorry po.
Ayun po, nagkaroon lang daw po ng technical difficulties. So, ulitin ko na lang po yung sa contribution. He strengthened and extended the peristyle of Bramante. Yung peristyle po, yung po yung mga nakapalibot dun sa may structure into a series of arched and ordered openings around the base. The base of the western choir and the beginning of the south ambulatory was also built in the time of the architect. Ito po yung ambulatory. Tapos yung peristyle po. Next.
So, ang third architect naman po na nag-ambag sa pagbuo ng St. Peter's Basilica ay si Fra Giocondo. Siya po ay isang humanist, architect, and engineer whose designs and written works signal the transition in architectural modes from early to high Renaissance. So nabanggit naman po kanina yung difference between early and high Renaissance kung saan sa high Renaissance po mas pinabuti or mas nilink yung mga structural sa mathematics and yung ideal na perfect beauty kung saan merong harmony sa color, merong higher level of realism and yung contrast between light and darkness. At isa sa mga contribution niya ay yung ambag niya sa architectural engineering. Kung kaya naman noong 1513 ay inappoint siya ni Pope Leo X kasama ni Donato Bramante na maging architect ng new church ng St. Peter's Basilica. Siya ay responsible para sa pagpapabuti at saka pagpapatibay ng pundasyon ng The Great Basilica at yung mga piers dahil sa kaalaman niya sa ganitong uri ng structural engineering.
Rafael Sancho de Urbino, or Rafael. He was the fourth architect of St. Peter's Basilica, a master painter and architect of the Italian High Renaissance. His work is admired for its clarity of form and ease of composition, and for its visual achievement of Neoplatonic ideal of human grandeur. In 1514, Leo X chose him to work on the Basilica of St. Peter's alongside Bramante. After Bramante's death in 1514, he was named architect of the new St. Peter's. He changed the Greek cross plan into a Latin cross plan. Raphael's plan was for a basilica in the form of a Roman cross with a short pronaos and a facade. The main change in Raphael's plan is the nave of 5 bays with a row of complex apsidal chapels of the aisles on either side. Raphael died at the age of 37 because of a fever, and so
most of his works was altered or demolished. Tapos po, bukod sa pagpapalit ni Rafaelo ng Greek cross plan to a Latin cross plan, may mahalaga rin pong contribution yung mga masterpiece niya sa St. Peter's Basilica, tulad ng Vision of the New Jerusalem, The Fall of Babylon, and etc., which can be seen today as a major piece in Basilica's decoration and architecture and in Roman Catholic Church.
Baldassar Peruzzi. Baldassar Peruzzi is a Zionist architect and painter. Kaedaran niya he belongs in the same generation as Rafael and Donato Bramante. Nung pumanaw si Rafael noong 1520, Peruzzi was appointed as one of the architects for St. Peter's in Rome. Next po. Yung contribution po niya is, he maintained the changes that Rafael proposed to the internal arrangement, to the three main apses. Pero yung iba po doon is, bumalik lang po siya doon sa Greek cross plan na pinopose po ni Bramante. Next po.
Architect Antonio da Sangallo, born 12 of April 1484 in Florence, evolved to become a dominant figure in 16th century Rome architecture. He is referred to as the Younger to distinguish him from his uncle Antonio da Sangallo the Elder, who also worked as an architect. He was actually the personal architect of Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, later become Pope Paul III, for whom he designed the Palazzo Farnese in Rome together with Michelangelo. Sangallo had maintained a good relationship with the popes and thus was constantly involved in the designing and building process of St. Peter's Basilica since 1513. And so in 1520, he served as the lead architect until his death in 1546. Contribution. As Capo Maestro, he was in charge of the day-to-day construction of the basilica for many years. He also created a design for the basilica, of which a wooden model exists today. His main practical contribution was to strengthen Bramante's piers, which had begun to crack. Sangallo also worked extensively on the Vatican apartments, building the Pauline Chapel, the Sala Regia, which served as the entryway to the Sistine Chapel, and the Scala Regia, the staircase that served as the main entrance to the Apostolic Palace. Vasari also claims that Sangallo modified the Sistine Chapel by elevating the roof, although exactly what the modifications are is unclear. Next slide po. Ito yung facade of Sangallo's design for the Basilica. Dito, pinropose niya yung plan which combined features of Peruzzi, Rafael, and Bramante's design. Although yung exterior niya has much merit than the St. Peter's Basilica na na-built today kasi meron pa tong towers, spires, ridges, and maraming colonnades. He also added a great and well-nigh hall or vestibule flanked by two great campanili, giving to the exterior the form of the Latin cross. Yung halos kasing taas ng cross na dalawang tower, yun. But his plan was never realized because it was greatly criticized by his successor. So mostly, ang nagawa lang niya is i-supervise halos lahat yung construction, and before pa maisukatuparan yung plan, namatay na siya. And then yung successor niya, kinriticize yung works niya, so pinalitan nila. But still, the magnificent wooden model of his project is stand 4.5 meter tall model in the largest from the Renaissance can be admired today in one of the basilica's octagon. Yun yung wooden model. Michelangelo. Next. Michelangelo, in full name, Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, born March 6 in 1475 in Camprise, Republic of Florence, Italy. Died February 18, 1564 in Rome, Papal States.
He is an Italian Renaissance sculptor, painter, architect, and poet who exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of Western art. Michelangelo was considered the greatest living artist in his lifetime, and ever since then, he has been held to be one of the greatest artists of all time. A number of his works in painting, sculpture, and architecture rank among the most famous and existent. So after Sangallo's death, the assignment was passed over Michelangelo. But by this time, 70 years old na siya and repeatedly, nirefuse niya yung offer kasi according sa kanya, ayaw niyang dalhin yung burden ng pag-build ng basilika. But Pope Paul III forced him to accept it. Michelangelo was not an admirer of his predecessor's work and saw demolished many parts that has been built. Michelangelo considered the expensive project proposed by Sangallo too artificial and more in accordance to German architecture because may mga elements ito katulad ng spires, ridges, etc. He rejected Sangallo's and Rafael's idea and returned the central plan of the original project proposed by Bramante with the intention to further emphasize the impact of the dome. He changed it from a balanced and restful dome into a dynamic construction. He put a drum or ring at the base of the dome that appears to be squeezing the dome and forcing its sides to spring upwards. He also shortened Raphael's nave. He also contributed on Pieta, St. Peter's exterior of the church, and St. Peter's interior. So next slide. Ito yung the Pieta, now displayed behind the glass case in St. Peter's. The word Pieta means mercy in Italian, and it is an artwork depicting Virgin Mary holding the dead body of Jesus Christ after his crucifixion. This is the most visited sculpture in St. Peter's Basilica. Other artwork include the marble statue of David and the Sistine Chapel. Yung artworks doon, yung katulad na nasabi ko kanina, the Last Judgment, a fresco sa wall, tapos yung the creation of Adam sa ceiling. Also, in St. Peter's exterior and interior, some of the works niya is the cliff-like walls of the apse and the towering pilaster. Pati yung base caricature sa may portico. Around the base of the dome, he placed a colonnaded walkway next to the big windows lined up one next to the other. One of each window, an alternating frame of triangle and semi-elliptical shape. Yung pedicature na tinuturo sa atin kanina ni Ma'am, pag ni-wide nyo yung picture ng St. Peter's Basilica's dome sa may bandang window nun, makikita nyo alternating yung pedicament sa triangle, semi-elliptical, triangle, semi-elliptical. He created huge semicircular walls echoing inside the dome to support the weight of the dome. He also replaced the sharp corners of the columns underneath the dome that supposedly support the weight of the dome. He had also thickened the exterior wall of the dome from the outside. He used colossal order, meaning huge flat pilasters around the building's curves and corner to create a rippling muscular surface. From far away, it creates a step-like movement of the cornice. He also designed an enormous cupola as the center element of the basilica. He took inspiration from the cupola of the Duomo of Florence designed by Bruno Leschi. When Michelangelo died, all that was missing from the new basilica were the corner chapels, the facade, and the cupola, of which only the drum and its column had been completed. To highlight one of the most significant characters of St. Peter's Basilica, Michelangelo designed a dome that would actually dwarf the nearby Pantheon. It would be smaller than the Pantheon in diameter, but stand much, much higher. Made almost entirely of heavy masonry, the dome stretches 138 feet in diameter and rises 452 feet above the street. To support such a giant dome, builders placed 3 iron rings within the masonry of the dome. But even the rings do not hold back the outward thrust of the tension. Significant cracks eventually develop around the dome's base. By early 18th century, the cracks become serious enough for Vatican engineers to add several more tension rings as emergency fix. Fortunately, this solution has stood the test of time. The basilica's elaborate dome reigns over the eternal city skyline, a compass whose a compass for those who wanders the street of the Rome.
Giacomo della Porta. Giacomo della Porta is an Italian architect whose work represents the development in style of from late Mannerism to early Baroque. He was the chief Roman architect during the latter third of the 16th century and contributed to the most of the major architectural projects undertaken in Rome during that time. Next slide po. Della Porta was a follower of Michelangelo and continued two of his greatest architectural projects, the Piazza del Campidoglio and the St. Peter's in the Vatican at Rome. Working with Domenico Fontana, the architect to Pope Sixtus V, Della Porta gave a higher, more pointed profile than Michelangelo had intended to the dome of St. Peter's, and it became the prototype of the Baroque dome. From 1573, he was in charge of the ongoing construction of St. Peter's Basilica, and later, in collaboration with Domenico Fontana, completed Michelangelo's dome between 1588 to 1590. So yung significant contribution nga po ni Della Porta sa St. Peter's Basilica is yung dome. As I mentioned earlier, yung forte po ni Della Porta is more of Baroque style. And his work represents the development in style from late Mannerism to early Baroque. Baroque architecture often used visual and theatrical effects designed to surprise and awe the viewer. Kaya ito po yung something na characteristic ng Baroque na in-incorporate ni De La Porta sa design ng St. Peter's Basilica. So another another trivia that I wanted to share with you is that the St. Peter's Dome is the tallest dome in the world. It has a height of 136 meters and an internal diameter of 42 meters, making it one of the largest domes in the world. In other words, ang ibang katawagan po sa dome ng St. Peter's Basilica is yung cupola. And it is one of the most overlooked aspects of the Basilica. And kapag inakyat natin ito as tourist, on top of it, we can see the St. Peter's Basilica and at the same time, yung buong lugar ng Vatican, matatanaw natin. Not only you can see the incredible mosaics up close, but you can also see a view of the entirety of Rome from above the Vatican. And also, another interesting fact about this dome na in-related din kay Giacomo della Porta is yung at the base of the dome, we can read the beautiful inscription. Sa lower portion ng dome, nababasa natin yung letters or words na naka-inscribe doon na Latin, translation from Latin, but actually it is a Bible verse na makikita sa Matthew 16:18 to 19. Ito po yung sinasabi. And I tell you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. So, if you are familiar with the Gospel of Matthew, malalaman natin na itong passage na ito is yung binigay ni Jesus sa apostle na si Simon or other name of Peter na nangangahulugang rock. Kaya yun po yung relation nito dun sa passage at sa St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica was literally built on top of St. Peter's grave, which can indeed be considered as the rock or the cornerstone of the building. So ito nga po yung rock or cornerstone na tinutukoy dun sa Bible verse na yon. Kaya kung mapapansin po natin, ito po yung parang pinaka significant message nung basilica na yon na upon this rock I will build my church. So yun po. Next slide.
Ang susunod na architect po ay si Domenico Fontana. Si Domenico Fontana ay isa sa mga naambag niya sa St. Peter's Basilica ay ang pagtulong niya sa pagyari ng St. Peter's Dome na unang dinisenyo ni Michelangelo katuwang ni Della Porta. Noong 1585, ninais ni Pope Sixtus V na ilipat yung isang obelisk na dating nakapwesto sa likod ng sangkristi ng St. Peter's at ilagay ito sa Piazza of St. Peter sapagkat gusto niya na palakihin yung basilika kaya naisip niya na ilipat yung obelisk na yon. Ang problema, masyadong mabigat tsaka marupok yung bato para ilipat. Una nating narinig yung obelisk noong panahon ng Egyptian era kung saan tanda ito ng commemoration sa isang individual o kaya sa isang pangyayari at para na rin mag-honor sa isang god. Ang obelisk na ito ay inukit noong panahon ng paghahari ni Nebkare Amenemhet II na orihinal na nakatayo sa Temple of the Sun sa Heliopolis. Dinala ito ng isang Romanong emperador na ang pangalan ay si Caligula sa Roma noong 37 CE or Common Era bilang isa sa mga maraming tanda ng pananakop ng Romano sa Egypt na kalaunan ay pinalitan ng pangalan na para kay Nero. Gayunpaman, maraming mga nagbigay ng mga proposal or nagsumite ng mga plano kung paanong maililipat yung obelisk na yon. Sabi nila meron daw 500 na lalaki na nagsumite ng kanilang plano kay Pope Sixtus V. At si Fontana ang nanalo sa kompetisyon na yon. Ang ginawa sa plano ni Fontana ay nagtayo siya ng isang frame tower of timbers o yung mga woods. Ayan, makikita nyo dito, yun yung mga woods. Gawa siya sa mga woods sang construction na ginagamit ngayon. At sa pamamagitan ng lubed na nakasabit doon ay tinaas nila yung obelisk mula sa pedestal nun o yung base. At binaba nila sa isang wooden platform na may gulong at nilipat sa bagong lugar doon nga sa may piyasa ng St. Peter. At doon nila muling tinayo at naglagay sila ng bagong base nung obelisk na yon. Sinasabi na ang proyekto na yon na ginawa niya ay nangailangan ng 900 na lalaki, 75 na kabayo at hindi mabilang-bilang na puli at haba ng lubid. So pag sinabi na kay Fontana, isa sa mga major contribution niya talaga is yung paglipat ng obelisk.
Giacomo da Next slide po. So, si Giacomo Baronia, one of the great architects who dominated Italian Mannerist architectural designs and statistically anticipated the Baroque. He may be best known for promoting classical designs, especially in the form of columns. Vignola's treatise, The Five Orders of Architecture, describes the ideas in the 10 books of architecture, De Architectura, by Vitruvius instead of directly translating it. Vignola outlines detailed rules for proportioning buildings and his rule for perspective. Next slide po. After the death of Michelangelo in 1564, Vignola continued work at St. Peter's Basilica and built two smaller domes according to Michelangelo's plan.
The 11th architect is Carlo Maderno. Next slide. Carlo Maderno is a leading Roman architect of the early 17th century who determined the style of early Baroque architecture. He is remembered as one of the fathers of Baroque architecture, and his facades of Santa Susana, St. Peter's Basilica, and Sant Andrea della Valle were of key importance in the evolution of the Italian architecture. So si Carlo Maderno nga po yung tinuring na father of Baroque architecture, and napatunayan po ito sa mga important works niya such as Santa Susana, Sant Andrea della Valle, and most importantly yung St. Peter's Basilica. Moderno began his architectural career in Rome assisting his uncle Domenico Fontana. His first major Roman commission, the facade of Santa Susana, led to his appointment in 1603 as the chief architect of St. Peter's. In 1607, he designed the nave and the new facade for St. Peter's and was made architect to Pope Paul V. Um, Modernist additions to St. Peter's were consonant with the spirit of the Counter-Reformation. So yung pinaka-contribution nga po ni Carlo Maderno sa St. Peter's Basilica is nag-add siya ng nave and tinransform niya yung Greek cross plan ni Michelangelo into a longitudinal one, thus reverting to a scheme of early Christian medieval cathedrals. Yun nga po yung one of the importance or the contributions niya is yung nag-add siya ng nave. So first, then yung specifications po ng nave na ito is the nave is 90 meters long, 26 meters wide, and 44.5 meters high. It consists of 4 bays which are divided by pairs of marble pilasters, 25 meters high. Between each pair of pilasters are 2 niches which house statues of the sainted founders of religious orders, as we can see in the picture. Personifications of the virtues occupy the spandrels of the bay arches. Next slide. It the facades. It ends at the facade of St. Peter's, in which 376 feet wide and 150 feet high. Designed by Carlo Maderno, the facade features a giant order of Corinthian columns, each 90 feet high and is topped by 13 statues, Christ flanked by the 11 apostles, excluding Peter, plus John the Baptist. So yung facade nga po ng St. Peter's Basilica is nagpapakita nung 11 apostles. Bakit po 11? Kasi wala doon si Peter, kasi yung statue ni Peter ay nasa stairs ng mismong St. Peter's Basilica at pinalitan ito ng statue ni John the Baptist. So, yung other significant contribution of Moderno's plan sa facade is that nag-extend yung mga nagawa niya sa facade is na-destroy niya yung plan ni Michelangelo na conception and substituted something less impressive. Parang dinetract niya yung plan ni Michelangelo and nag-incorporate siya ng something less impressive kasi nga po hindi na na-appreciate ng mga tao yung plan ni Michelangelo from every point of view. As a result of these alterations, Maderno had to design a facade which would not detract too much from the dome and at the same time would be worthy of its setting and also contain a central feature to provide a frame for the figure of the Pope when he appeared in the public. So as we can see, kapag zoom po natin yung picture na nakikita natin, meron po dun na benediction logia. Yun po yung frame na kung saan magpapakita yung Pope para mag-appear siya sa public. So these conflicting requirements were met as far as possible by Maderno's adaptation of a typical Roman palace facade with decorative motifs taken from Michelangelo's works. The plan to provide bell towers at the ends of to enframe the dome in distant views had to be abandoned because the foundations gave trouble. The work, including the decoration, was completed and consecrated on November 18, 1626. So yung specification po ng facade na ito is that ito ay 114.69 meters wide and 45.55 meters high. It is built of travertine stone with a giant order of Corinthian columns and a central pediment rising in front of a tall attic surmounted by 13 statues na tulad nga po ng sinabi ko kanina, 11 apostles except for Peter and added by John the Baptist. So yun po. Next slide.
Giovanni Bernini, also known as Gian Lorenzo Bernini. In 1624, Gian Lorenzo Bernini entered the Fabrica, the construction project of St. Peter's. After 5 years of working on designing a new canopy of Vatican Confessio, Bernini was appointed the official architect of St. Peter's. Another facts about Gian Lorenzo Bernini: he is also credited with being the leading figures in creating the Baroque style of sculpture. Bernini has many contributions in making the St. Peter's Basilica. Some of them are baldachin. Bernini was commissioned to build the symbolic structure over the tomb of St. Peter in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The result of the famous immense gilt bronze baldachin executed between 1624 and 1633. Its twisted column derived from the early Christian column that had been used in the altar screen of Old St. Peter's. Baldacchino po pala yun. They said that the baldacchino is tall as a 4-story building. Ang tawag sa column na meron dun sa apat na yon, yung twisted na column na nakikita natin sa picture, Solomonic column. And Bernini himself suggested that the altar below the baldacchino represent the crucifixion, the triumphant cross above significant is a resurrection, and Michelangelo's dome at the top of was symbolic for the Christ's ascent to heaven. Sinasabi rin ni Bernini na yung pag-work daw niya ng baldacchino ay nag-ano lang daw ng by luck. Kasi daw, pag daw nagkaroon daw ng kahit konting error lang sa paggawa niya ng baldacchino, magiging cause na daw yun ng ano yun? Magiging delikado na daw yun sa mga tao. Next slide po. And St. Peter's Chair of Cathedra Petri. Bernini's vision for the Cathedra Petri or Chair of St. Peter's, the bronze chairs completed in 1666. In cases the wooden one that was supposedly used in St. Peter himself. One of the church's most venerable relics, the throne has been in both Old and New St. Peter's for many centuries. Yung chair daw na yon, naka-place siya sa center ng main apse and seems to be float above the altar. Yung chair na yon, yung paa niya, merong mga saint na nakaukit doon. Sina Saint Augustine, Saint Ambrose, Saint Athanasius, and Saint Chrysostom. Next po. Colonnade and Piazza. Commissioned by Alexander VII. In the summer of 1656, Bernini's colonnade may very well institute the most successful architectural work known to mankind. St. Peter Piazza is yet another example of Bernini's skill and creative perfection. Entering St. Peter's Piazza, the pilgrim is confronted with symbolic heaven with 96 of Bernini's saints and maitris situated above individual traversing columns. In order to comprehend the wide facade of St. Peter Basilica, Bernini made it appear taller by constructing relatively low 39 foot yung taas ng column ng mga nasa colonnade na yan. He also connected the curved colonnade to the basilica by pair of straight and closed corridors of the same style and height in order to provide the further optical pinching effect of the broad facade. Next po. Chapel of Blessed Sacrament. The Capella del Santissimo Sacramento, Chapel of the Blessed Sacrament, was constructed in 1973 to 1974, and he was one of the last work of Bernini. Sinasabi dito na yung angel daw dito sa Chapel of Blessed Sacrament, yung left eye daw dito ng angel naka-close. Tapos yung right eye daw niya naka-open. Ginagamit daw yun ng technique ng Baroque period na yung technique na yon para ma-invite yung mga tao na makiisa or makiparticipate sa ginagawa sa loob ng chapel. Ilan po, salamat.
Sige. Meron pa
Ma'am,
ba?
Ma'am,
uulitin ko po yung kay
Yes, kay
Giano po,
Edgerlyn.
ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Please. So, since hindi natin masyadong naintindihan si Edgerlyn kanina, she will be repeating her part. Yan.
Ma'am, nadidinig mo po?
Yes, Edgerlyn, very audible.
Thank you
So,
po.
Giuliano Dasangalo. Okay.
Juliana de Sangalo. Good afternoon po, ma'am. I'm Adeline. I'll be presenting the second architect that worked on the St. Peter's Basilica after the death of Donato Bramante. First, I'll be sharing a brief background about Giuliano de Sangalo. Many architects vied for the privilege of work on such prestigious project and put forward plans for a new basilica. At ang napili nga pong plans yung kay Donato Bramante. When he died in 1514, pinagpatuloy po ito ni Architect Villano. He was a military engineer, artist, and architect. Isa po sa mga project niya ang Santa Maria del Sarceri in Prato, year 1485 to 1491. It was a church with a Greek cross layout, was much influenced by Filippo Brunelleschi. In addition po, he was a successful military engineer in 1478. Next po. For his contribution naman po on the St. Peter's Basilica, he realized the value of coppering. When we say copper naman po in architecture, ito po yung mga square or polygonal ornamental sunken panel used in a series para po sa decoration po ng ceiling or vault na nag-lead po kay Giuliano para mas patibayan at i-extend ang prairie style ni Bramante into a series of arched and ordered openings around the base. This became a massive structure around by projecting foundation. Also, the base of the western choir and the beginning of the south ambulatory was built in his time. Marami po siguro sa inyong curious why he does not finish the basilica or bakit po konti lang po ang nagawa niya. The design and the building of new St. Peter Basilica serve as Giuliano's final project. Meron pong book or article po yon na nagsabing siya po yung dapat na first architect na mag-handle po ng basilica. Pero sabi ko nga po kanina, marami pong architect ang nagpasa ng mga plans and design po nila for the basilica. And napili nga po ni Julius II si Architect Bramante. And nung umalis po si Giuliano, but he was called back to Rome to assist the Basilica's reconstruction following the death of Julius II, the election of Giovanni de' Medici as Pope Leo X in 1513, and the death of Bramante in 1514. Dagdag info na rin po, 70 years old na po siya nung na-handle niya po yung St. Peter Basilica. And because of his age na din po and not the sufficient conditions, some architects were chosen to take up the design of the basilica. And after noon po, namatay na po siya, and that's the reason why he doesn't finish the basilica or the project never fully took off in his time po. Yun lang po. Thank you po.
Thank you, Edgerlyn. So, is there anyone else?
Ma'am, yes po. Meron.
All right.
Bale, in addition po sa nabanggit ni Edralyn, sinabi po niya doon na si Giuliano ay 70 years old na at si Fra Giocondo naman po ay 18 na nung mga panahon na yon. Kaya ang nag-handle na po ng Basilica ay si Rafael. Bale, magkakaroon lang din po ng onting summary since medyo naging mahaba po yung mga discussions nila.
Thank you.
Namin po for this. So, ito po ang itsura ng St. Peter's Basilica ngayon na makikita niyo po yung mga iba't ibang works ng iba't ibang architects under sa direction po ng Pope na nag-handle nun.
Can we pause? Can
Bale,
we pause that slide?
okay po.
Guys, just by looking at the facade or the exterior, the bird's eye view of the St. Peter's Basilica, how does it make you feel? Sige, yung reporters muna. How does this make you feel? Looking at this structure, how do you feel about it?
Ma'am, sa akin po personally, parang sobrang overwhelming po nung structure ng ng church, ng basilica po. Parang sobrang dami po niyang elements na parang pinagtagpi-tagpi po yung mga iba't ibang parts para mabuo po yung basilica. Though sobrang ganda din po ng mismong itsura niya once na nabuo. Hindi naman po siya yung parang masyadong magulo, pero makikita niyo po, mare-recognize niyo po kung alin yung mga contributions ng bawat architects po.
For me, if you would ask me, looking at the photo that you have, I feel secured. I feel light. I feel that the building is light, yet massive. It doesn't give me an impression that it's heavy, even if it's massive. I feel secured kasi parang may nakabalot sa akin palagi if I'm standing in the middle at the obelisk. So, this is something that your high or late Renaissance architecture wants to communicate to you. It doesn't want chaos, it wants order. It doesn't want misplaced elements, but it wants harmony. It wants proportion. It wants all its elements to be combined in such a way that it doesn't bring you it doesn't bring conflict. Kahit nabanggit natin kanina na there were conflict of interests and in designs, but eventually, as it was from its conception up until now that it's been built, there's an element of uh there's an element of light, security, order from the repetition of elements. Uh, the height of the building is not too high, it's not too low, it's just right. The dome, it made it more, it gave its height, but it did not make the building look too bulky or too high. So it's just right. It's the right amount of a little bit of everything for me. If you would ask me, I don't know about the other reporters, but I would like you to keep in mind that the Renaissance era is the age of enlightenment. It's the age where we break free from the dark ages. So there's that. So this is one of those particular discussions that you have to remember, because aside from it has a rich history, the St. Peter's Basilica has a rich history. Aside from that, there's also, bukod sa lumalabas siya sa board exam every year, you have to understand how it came to be from one small Greek cross plan to the one that it is now, with the obelisk, with the enclosure, the domes, and the entablatures, the pediments. So you have to know that. We have to know that as architects. And of course, the interior, the baldacchino, the one with the Solomonic columns. Just a quick trivia, only two churches in the Philippines, as far as I know, have the Solomonic columns. Uh, it's the Solomonic columns were from an architect named Churriguera. So it's reflective of the Churrigueresque architecture. Google that, so you'll find out. I think he's from Spain. Let me check. Let me check from you guys. Churriguera. Churrigueresque architecture. Yeah, it's the Spanish Baroque architecture, Churrigueresque. So, I'm sorry, saan nyo ako nahuling narinig bago ako na-disconnect? Natanggal kasi yung connection ko.
Solomonic column po ba?
Sa Solomonic column. So, Solomonic column is an element of Churrigueresque architecture, which is your Spanish Baroque, from the name of the architect, Churriguera. A quick trivia is that only two Philippine churches, as far as I know, have the Churrigueresque column, and they're not even in the Baroque style. One is Malate Church or Ermita Church in Manila. The other one is Daraga Church, which was built in 1977 in Daraga Albay, Bicol, if you've been there. It's far south, so I don't expect. But I have photos of that I can share with you kasi I made it a point na I go to Philippine churches first before abroad. So yun, I hope you can visit your Philippine churches too. So any questions? I sorry pala, May Ann, you're summarizing. Can you May Ann? Ann?
Po. Ma'am, pwede
Yes?
pa po ba? Ano po kasi,
Ano?
magsa-7 na po kasi baka.
Ay, mahaba pa ba yung summary mo?
Hindi po,
Yeah,
bale,
you
eto
finish na
na.
lang. So I think you can read the summary of May Ann so we don't consume anything beyond 7 p.m. May Ann, can you make sure this slide gets sent to the group chat?
Okay po, ma'am.
So any
Okay po.
questions, comments, and suggestions or any violent reaction, you reserve that or you type it in our group chat because I don't want to take up much of your time. We're only limited from 5 to 7, which is why I value your time from 5 p.m. You should be here already. I don't have to remind you of the time. So questions, comments, suggestions are strictly send that to Messenger or reserve that for next week since we will be having another discussion next week. So have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to class very early today.
Thank you po, ma'am.
Thank you, guys. I'll send the recording
Thank
later.
you po, ma'am.
Thank you
Thank
po,
you.
ma'am.
Thank you po, ma'am.
Thank you po, ma'am.